Marco City.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy. Thank Almighty God for this opportunity to once again rise on behalf of the people of Marco City and to reflect their dreams and aspirations as I weigh in on the issues that affect all of our lives. Mr. Deputy, today, while we are in this place discussing the mid-year budget performance report, there are far too many Bahamians, some in my constituency, as I'm sure in many of our constituencies, are still struggling to deal with the high food costs, the new fees this administration has saddled so many of them with, and in particular, small, medium-sized businesses. And many Bahamians live with the fear of crime in general, violent crimes in particular. Much of the boasting, desk bombing, patting on back by this administration, they must know by now that it doesn't pass the field test by Bahamians or the see test, what they see with their own eyes. And the way this government does business certainly does not pass the smell test. Mr. Deputy, this mid-year budget performance is an abysmal one by this administration. The member for Cat Island has begun most of his presentations with the same tired recitation about this government opening up the economy, knowing full well the economy was already open, and around the world, economies were reopening, and there was a pent-up demand for travel, and we benefited from that, and we are happy that we benefited from that. We are happy that persons came from the eastern seaboard of the United States and from Canada to the Bahamas. And what we had was tremendous growth, 14% growth 2 years ago, because of that pent-up demand. Unfortunately, Mr. Deputy, that growth then fell off the following year to 4%. And Mr. Deputy, here's the curious thing. This administration then predicted that the growth rate would continue somewhere around, I believe it was 5.5%. But they didn't bother to tell us that after tremendous advice and consultation, which they rarely do, that they have since revised the growth rate for our economy to, I believe it is 1.1%, in their same book that they love to refer to as they're now scrambling to find the page and the line item. And so it's very interesting that they didn't bother to include that in the Prime Minister's presentation. But much like the line item about moving money from the disability line item, I'm confident they did not take the time to look at these line items, but thank God for public servants who put them in anyway. So all of this fanciful talking about how remarkably well they are doing, the facts does not bear out that their specific policies were responsible for the rebounding of the economy as was predicted during COVID. And so now the Prime Minister talks about why aren't other countries doing as well as ours. It would have been useful for him to give that percentage of projected growth rate of 1.1% in order to support the point that he's making. Because certainly he called a different figure. And so, again, I agree with him. Read Bahamas, look at the details, and yes, they must be fact-checked as often as is possible. This is the same administration that had projections about a $131.5 million deficit. In other words, that they were going to be short by that amount of money. You know, it's a simple equation. There's a certain amount of money we earn, and there's a certain amount of money we spend. They said, based on what we're going to spend, we can be short by about $131.5 million. But what occurred actually, Mr. Deputy, is that they exceeded that by $258 million. Not at the end of the year, at the half-year mark. We expect, unfortunately for us, that their deficit figure is likely to be somewhere around $400 million. It may even be higher. But certainly it wasn't important enough for the mover and the seconder of this resolution to mention that in their notes. This is precisely why many creditors, as well as multilateral organizations evaluating us, investors, both domestic and international, are having problems doing business and, in fact, lending money to this administration, because the view is it's very difficult to believe their economic plan or their fiscal plan. We have a challenge of credibility with the Davis, and I will not leave you out, sir, as the seconder did, Cooper administration. On the issue of BPL, Mr. Deputy, I thought it very fascinating that the Minister for Energy, the brand new, spanking brand new Minister for Energy, said that their plan is transformative. Well, certainly we don't believe them. But even if it was transformative, it certainly isn't transparent, because we do not know what the plan is. And in fact, the minister supports this point that the public does not know, the workers do not know, stakeholders do not know, energy providers who would have loved to compete for what they are giving out specifically to some would like to know. The interesting thing is, in defense of this administration, horrible handling of their private negotiations and arrangements, the point this minister makes is that here is what the deal is not. Well, my God, we hired them to tell us what the deal is. Exactly. And so we are concerned that after that presentation, we are still not clearer on what the nature of the arrangement is. And what is true is that if we are to grow more than 1.1%, or the fiction that they had talked about previously, 5%, which is ideal for our economy, the energy sector requires a vision and a plan of action replete or including timelines and specifics about where we intend to take the sector, and then more narrowly what we intend to do with BPL. Today, we are unclear on what this administration intends to do with BPL. The truth of the matter is, first of all, they were responsible, the member for Kent Island, in tandem with the member for Fort Charlotte, those two were responsible in large measure for the exponential increase in the fuel charge and electricity bill of ordinary Bahamians and small businesses. To date, they have not apologized. And the member for Fort Charlotte is still in the parliament, even though he misled this parliament consistently on what the facts were relative to what he knew and why he did not respond appropriately. And so while we are in this debate, let me just say, as it relates to the BPL secret arrangements that are going on. One thing we know, there was no request for proposal with respect to what is being pursued now in terms of who would generate power for BPL going forward, nor was there a request for proposal in terms of who would be responsible for transmission and distribution. So there's no competitive bidding. What is also clear is that there was no advance consultation or education of BPL workers and others about the matter that the minister just skirted around the issues about today. None. What is also true is that there was no discussion in the parliament about what they intend to do with one of our sacred assets. What is also true is that there is no plan that should have been outlined today. There's no plan on how the generation company, the company that will generate the power going forward, the part of the company that would generate, who would be responsible for transmission and distribution, and the government that will be left with some portion of it. There's no plan shared with this country on how those three entities would work together. That's why workers are wondering, who will we be working for? Who will be paying us? Who will be securing our benefits, our pension? Who will be in charge of that? The reason I believe the minister could not comment on the plan, because they have not yet worked out the details. That's not uncommon for this administration. Remember, this is the same administration with the same minister, well, half of it, because you had the previous minister as well, they are twins in this matter, and of course the prime minister, that made available over $100 million to BPL, and admitted here in the House and in writing that they did not work out the terms of that loan. Could you imagine that? Giving a loan and never working out the terms of that loan. And first of all, it was illegal for them to give that particular loan. This is how this administration functions, which is why I'm surprised, less nowadays, that they are so arrogant despite being serial lawbreakers. Mr. Deputy, as we debate this resolution, I should remind the public that I predict this administration will come back to this parliament to amend the Electricity Act, because much of what they are contemplating today, they are unable to do it in the present arrangement. Mr. Deputy, the workers need answers. The consumers who have suffered because of this administration with high electricity bill need answers. Let me just pivot for a moment, Mr. Deputy, to this government's travel. Mr. Deputy, all of us who have served in cabinet or as parliamentarians, we travel from time to time on behalf of the Bahamian people. That's what you do. So our issue has never been travel in and of itself. It's always been that this administration obviously have a size problem. And so they love to take large delegations. And the question is everyone in the delegation fit for purpose? Do they have a particular role that they play that would be beneficial to our development? What is the rate of return on all of those persons? Secondly, the persons who often go, the question is, should they be there? Should the Prime Minister be at a meeting presenting when most of the persons who are there are ministers? So quite frankly, his Minister of Foreign Affairs or the minister related to that ministry could be there. Should a minister be there when they are sitting around the table with primarily permanent secretaries and directors? Couldn't the permanent secretary, director, or the ambassador in that region not attend that meeting? And wouldn't it be useful to know what the return on investment for that particular meeting was? But the problem with using that criteria, then they would have to explain why they used $200,000 to go and watch the Prime Minister receive an award. That's a difficult thing to explain to the public. Especially when you're removing funds from a disability line item, and you could say all you want about how they will not be disadvantaged. Just think about that for a moment. The mental gymnastics you would have to do to make that kind of determination. You should have seen that line item and figured this can't be the place where I go. Especially since most government buildings need to be retrofitted to ensure that we have ramps and other infrastructure to facilitate access for members of the disabled community. It's amazing. Many of our constituents can't get rent assistance for 2 years, 1 year, not because of the social workers who are working hard. This government happens to be cash-strapped, and their priorities are wrong. $200,000, do you know how many people would not have the stress of being in somebody's front room with all their children? Or it could have been about 40% of the halfway house that they promised 2 budgets ago. $500,000, $200,000 of it went for the award ceremony, for slapping up. That's how we spend it. That's how we roll it now. The Prime Minister in May bragged about the government cutting travel budget, reflecting a deliberate policy. Mr. Deputy, only 14 days later, I heard the member for Angleton says, I think moments later, something to that effect. Well, 14 days later, Angleton, 14 days later into the new budget, the same Prime Minister who talked about cutting it, this July 14, his office was already transferring $248,000 into his budget as a part of a total $448,000 inward transfer for travel for the month of July. So within the first month of the fiscal year, he had already almost doubled his approved $579,000 budget. What that does is it makes it a mockery of the system. So it's hard to believe them. So we're not being difficult when we say it's difficult to believe them or based on their initial statements. You got to wait and see. Let me also say that the economy of the Bahamas, it is our collective desire that we continue to grow. But the government has to outline, which they do not, a proper economic plan that would not only help the economy to grow, because it could grow, but it could grow for those select families, like the ones, some folks who we're trying to ensure that they create more generational wealth, so that 10 generations down the road they get paid. But the vast majority of Bahamians are hurting. So the economy could grow, Michael, but not develop to spread the resources across this country to benefit persons in Key West Street where I grew up, or Washington Street, or 7th Street, or Melbourne Road in Yellow Elder, or Step Street in Fox Hill. They will eat too. They will live nice too. But we see the same administration that prides itself on being friends of the struggling poor, black man and woman, they're the ones who are seeking to empower a whole host of other people of all hues to create generational wealth on our backs. And if it isn't on our backs, then reduce the amount of single sourcing of granting of contract, make it competitive to give some other people a chance on this road in this country to eat. To eat. To eat. But no, their focus is on a narrow group of persons. A narrow group of persons who they are empowering. And so the point, so again, this administration, in the midst of this particular midterm budget report, must hit the reset button. The way in which they are heading will not augur benefit. It will not produce the kinds of benefits that we need, Mr. Deputy. The same administration have failed to be honest with the Bahamian public to give a measured view of the challenges we face. The closest they have come is recently. When this administration first came in here, they would beat the desk about for anything. Anything would excite them. But now that they realize, as the member for Exoma realizes, that the hotel is sold in Freeport, that the airport is not constructed, and by the way, this is 2.5 years later. By the time we were kicked out of office, we had Dorian, and then we had COVID. And so we have had far less time between Dorian, COVID, and being kicked out of office. They've had 2.5 years. And for all the boasting and brilliance that they haven't been able to produce. The same administration. The same administration is the administration, Mr. Deputy, that borrowed $500 million from the IDB, even though they were only approved for 100, I believe, and 31 million or thereabout, that they could use in terms of new borrowing. Now, we have a conflicting story by two important financial gurus in the country, or two important financial voices. One is saying, no, it has been used for rollover debt. Another one is saying something contrary. What we want to know is, did you violate the IDB protocols in terms of what you were using the $500 million for? Did you violate those protocols? Because one thing we do know is that if, in fact, you use it for the reason we believe you did, you should have really come back. You should have come back here to have a conversation with the country. So this is an administration. It doesn't matter what the rules are. They have no problem breaking it. Call it procurement law, they'll break it. Debt Management Act, they have no problem. I believe the member for Exoma went to the Far East, signed off on a loan. As far as we knew, only prime ministers could do that. The member for Housing on a $20 million loan, and that loan, we had no authority. Even as a corporate soul, had no authority to borrow the $20 million to enter into the arrangement that she did. But they have no difficulty with it. Went to the central bank, borrowed 232 special drawing rights, had no right to do it. Had to come back here and pass an act, an amendment to the central bank act in order to do what they did retroactively. And that's how they behave. And so when we say as we said, in the case of West Grand Bahama and Bimini, I think the member for Kid Island unsolicited, I believe. He volunteered that, yes, I was both campaigning and I was, doing some other work. I never saw so many ministers from this government, Mr. Deputy in Grand Bahama. I mean, people crying for their impact in Grand Bahama, but they were there on the people's dime doing politics. Doing politics. So when people ask me about the Prime Minister campaigning and it being paid for by the people's money, I'm like, really? Just the Prime Minister? It's whole cabinet. PAL secretaries, ministers of state, senior members of the ministry, all doing the PLP business, not the people's business. So I'm not surprised, Mr. Deputy. So they have no difficulty. And what you call it when you take government money for political purpose, it's called misappropriations. Where I grew up over the hill, they have another term. And so, but again, this is not strange, because this is the same administration that went to Bermuda using public money for political purposes. Admitted that they did, but were too arrogant to come and even bring a record of what was spent and the repayment to the Treasury. Now, the problem with that is, even in talking about repayment, because we don't know what has been paid, because we don't know what has been spent. What about your cousin, your family member, who moved that little thing from maybe a convenience store, somebody's yard, or a house that was under construction? Some of them before the courts. Some, their cases have already been adjudicated. But this administration, they go scot-free. In fact, it is not a moment, it's not a thing. They don't believe they need to answer for how they use the people's money. They make a mockery of this system because it's one rule for them and it's a different rule for everybody else. I could tell you about a house. I could tell you about a house where some things happened and your name was called, but I don't want to get into that. So just keep it. Just relax yourself. Relax yourself.
Honorable members.
Yourself.
Honorable members. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Angliston.
Relax yourself.
Forthwith.
Nobody knew I was talking about.
Withdraw those comments forthwith.
Honorable members.
Withdraw them forthwith.
Honorable members, you would address the chair.
You're a nasty member of parliament. You are nasty.
I withdraw.
You are nasty.
Thank you, honorable member.
You are vicious and you're nasty and you're a liar. You are a liar. Don't call my name. Don't go there.
Honorable members.
I didn't call your name.
You are.
Listen, do not give if you can't take. Don't give.
You are a vicious politician. And you don't want to go there.
Honorable members.
Okay.
You don't want to go there. You don't want to go there. You don't want to go there.
Honorable members.
Mr. Deputy.
Don't get mixed up. No, mix me up ever in this house.
Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, I think that, let me just say this before I continue, Mr. Deputy. All of us have reputations to protect, family members who are hurt by things that are said. And so I want to say to members in this place, I wish to adjudicate the issues that affect the Bahamian people and not get into personal things. But if you want to come for me, do not try to characterize me in one way when you can do something and I can't. I have families, I have a wife, I have a daughter, I have family as well. So if you want to talk, just be prepared.
Honorable members,
okay?
honorable members.
Let's move on, but you don't want to dwell on that. Yeah.
Honorable members, you would address the chair and not each other.
Mr. Deputy, I'm here to litigate the issues on behalf of the Bahamian people, not to defend myself, but also not to lay down and be bruised and brutalized by any member of this house. Anyone, by any member of this house. The public would recall that Prime Minister Davis admitted that he misappropriated. Mr. Deputy? Mr. Deputy?
Honorable members. Honorable members. Honorable members, we'll have order in the House, and please address your comments to the chair and not each other. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marco City.
Okay. Mr. You've crossed it over and over. Mr. Deputy, 12 days into this new budget cycle, we had an opportunity to see how this administration treats the people's money. Let us be clear that the theme, when you listen to this Prime Minister and Minister of Finance talk, is absolutely clear to us. That this is an administration that's big on public relations. The public is now seeing through their public relations, because at the end of the day, they're not feeling the prosperity, the $1.2 billion they're talking about in Grand Bahama. We ain't feeling it. And much of what they're talking about was entrained before they even came to government. The truth of the matter is, this is an administration, through its bad priorities, have squandered our money, and now that they are cash-strapped, that some public servants cannot have their deductions go to their financial institution and elsewhere as required, they are now seeking to claw back those funds by taxing the average citizen. Whether you're in insurance, they want to tell you how to spend your money on whose bonds. You may wish to go private, they want you to spend it with them. Same administration. Same administration that's giving a private company the authority to collect fees at the airport, increasing the cost to the average person who's bringing in goods. Customs is concerned about the arrangement that this government is entering into. Mr. Deputy, the Davis-Cooper administration has introduced taxes despite promising not to. When there was healthy revenue, they spent unwisely. And now they are exacting these taxes on us. I would dread the day that this administration on the real property tax issue, we believe Bahamians ought to pay their bills. No question about it. But this administration, you're going to trust this administration, Bahamian people, that if you are behind on your real property tax, that they can come and seize your property? Now, if they were doing that for all persons, all, who were in the identical situation, you could say they are serious about cleaning up the system, but they are not. I guarantee you, as they have in other things, they will cherry pick who house, who property they go after. That's how, in our estimation, they roll. The Prime Minister seeks to make small businesses compliance officers. I have to figure out what my landlord doing, whether he up to date, she up to date with the rest of the government. Burden that we are putting on the Bahamian people.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Fort Charlotte.
It's based on the rules. The imputation to the entire government, cherry picking on the prosecution of the collection of delinquent tax. I mean, that's a scurrilous allegation. He has put nothing on this table to substantiate that allegation.
Just throw it out there.
And if he doesn't withdraw it, I ask you, Mr. Deputy, to strike it from the record.
That's right.
Thank
It's
you, honourable member.
ridiculous.
Mr. Deputy, my comments.
Honourable
was,
member, are you going to withdraw?
No, I will not. I do not trust this administration. And so if you wish to expunge it, feel free.
Yeah.
I do not. I don't. I don't.
To level an allegation impugning the reputation of this entire government, it's not a matter of what he trusts. It's a matter of whether it's a fact. Cherry picking.
Thank you, honourable member. We'll have that expunged from the record. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Angliston.
The comments of the member of Marco City on his feet directed at me expunged from the record.
We will have that expunged from the record, honourable member. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Marco City.
Mr. Deputy, all comments made by the member from Angliston, whose name I never called in this house, and let me put that on the record, whose name I never called in this house, all of those should also be expunged from the record. Okay? Mr. Deputy, This administration, this administration, Mr. Deputy, is an administration that we are not prepared.
Order, honorable members. Order, honorable members. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marco City.
Mr. Deputy, this administration has not exercised any restraint with respect to spending. So for all of the talking, for all of the somber face they put on when they are performing as if they feel the afflictions of Bahamians, they have not exercised the kind of restraint required to ensure that we have resources for the things that are needed by the Bahamian people. There are many persons in Abaco and in Grand Bahama who, since this administration came to government, have not been touched in any substantial way in terms of home repairs, Mr. Deputy. For all of the criticisms that have been leveled at us because of how we manage Dorian, or what we did during COVID. Think about this for a moment. This administration has been in place for 2.5 years, and for the short period of time we were in before being kicked out of office, have touched thousands of homes. This administration is struggling to get in the hundreds. So there is a problem with priority in how they spend the people's money. Same administration that also talked about transformation of state-owned enterprises. But I guarantee you, if you do an audit of the state enterprises, they have escalated costs without correspondingly increasing productivity. If we're going to transform this country, then each of the institutions and departments must work effectively for the greater good of Bahamians. And it should not be a case that because they fail to grow the economy, to develop the economy, they then seek to use a whole host of other people's money in order to generate their favorite general's consultancy contract. It is a problem, Mr. Deputy. And so, Mr. Deputy, we are deeply concerned about the direction at the mid-year point. What would we do differently, Mr. Deputy? Let me run through several things we would do. We believe in Family Island development, Mr. Deputy, which is why, unlike this administration, they passed a Family Island Development Fund, and to the best of our knowledge, maybe $10 million has been used out of the $200 million that they talked about. That's what we would do different. We would seek to make sure that family islands are truly empowered and that we give local government greater authority to execute, Mr. Deputy. What would we do? The 10, the additional, okay, good. And so, Mr. Deputy.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Freetown.
The member has asked for additional time. If you are minded to exercise your discretion, we would wish, we would wish, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for the basis upon which you exercise your discretion to be well known. The member for Marco City has had the exact amount of time that every cabinet minister will have in this debate. And so if there's some basis upon which this discretion is being exercised, he doesn't say he needs to wrap anything up. He wants a significant period of time. I think we all need to know so that we may be...
1 minute.
Just let me finish, Junior.
1 minute.
Just let me finish, Junior.
Before the House started for 3 minutes in the Deputy Speaker's room, we came up with the agreement for 10 minutes. We'll be out of here.
No, we didn't come up with any agreements in
Making a
hands.
decision, it's not an agreement, it's 46-2.
Yeah. Senance, let him finish.
Yes, and so,
Honorable member.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, before I was rudely interrupted by my junior, the point that I make Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that we would have had something, if that is going to be a ruling of an exercise of discretion, it should be made clear, because then there would be implications with regard to cabinet ministers who may also wish to have that discretion exercised in their favor.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The Honourable Member for Marco City will have 5 minutes, 6 minutes to wrap up. Thank you. 6 minutes. 6 minutes.
So just so the public can be clear, there was a discussion held with the deputy, leader of government and opposition business with view of having additional time. My understanding was 10 minutes was the agreement. So, I see, okay, no problems. Mr. Deputy, our approach would be different than this administration. We believe that it's important to consult, and that when we make decisions on the basis of consultation as well as we make evidence-based decisions. Mr. Deputy, we believe that it's important that governments inspire trust, and therefore they ought to be open and transparent. This administration is the poster child for doing deals and arrangements in the dark. And we have to say it that way because of this reason. Today, we do not know the terms of the majority of PPPs that have been signed in the Bahamas by this administration. We do not know if it's for 8%, 10%, 12% versus the percentage that they could have gotten going to a multilateral, going to IDB or elsewhere. We do not know what the various settlements they have entered into with public servants who have received settlements. That's a very different thing than a commercial agreement. We do not know. This is an administration that is, again, today in violation of the procurement law and fails to introduce the Freedom of Information Act. What is it that they have to hide? We would be different than them. We would make sure that this is a rules-based society. We are not about what they're doing, which is they are turning back the tide as it relates to ease of doing business. They are making it more difficult for Bahamian businesses to thrive in this culture. This administration, more than any other that we could think about. The marginalized populations who deserve carve-outs, we expected to see that for youth, for women, for family islands, but we're seeing carve-outs for wealthy Bahamians as opposed to those persons. We would be more focused on an inner city and historic community development and making incentives and concessions available so we could transform the inner city and historic areas in this country. We would have a different argument than they do around Bahamianization. We believe Bahamianization isn't just about getting Bahamians to occupy jobs that others are pursuing at the blue and white collar level. That's important and we support that. But we also believe that in the case of the shipyard, many of the companies, those subcontractors that provide services to those shipyards, we should ensure that those are onshore companies, that we attract those companies to come to the Bahamas with provisions on the employment that they would provide to Bahamians who are part of those subcontracting firms. We would behave differently than they. We would make sure that small businesses receive the grants that are earmarked. We still can't find the $50 million that this administration said they provided on an annual basis to small businesses. We would be different than them. We would select, Mr. Deputy, we would select persons who will serve on the Fiscal Responsibility Council. We believe that these councils are good as a check on what government is doing and to give feedback from civil society, people in the private sector, et cetera. We are at a loss why this government does not want it to be in place. And we believe that it's important for us to encourage national savings, further develop our capital and financial markets, explode youth entrepreneurship, and to diversify our economy. And so, Mr. Deputy, thank you for the additional time to make the case that this administration has performed poorly over the first 6 months of this fiscal year. And it is a continuation, Mr. Deputy, of smoke and mirrors, public relations exercises. But what they're doing doesn't pass the C test. We don't see the improvements they're talking about. Doesn't pass the field test. Many Bahamians are still hurting. And the way they do business does not pass the smell test. Thank you, Mr. Deputy.